Okay, not gonna lie, I've wanted to make this for ages, but I kept putting it off since there are already so many great videos on how to make a miniature stand mixer, but then I realized none of them used paper, and that's kind of my thing, so here we are! Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, well, it's great to meet you. I'm Stella, and today I'll show you how to make this miniature KitchenAid-inspired stand mixer for your dollhouse, and as always, I'll have a free printable template to help you make your own version. You'll find all the infos and the download link in the videos. So now, let's begin! We're gonna start by cutting this part quite a few times, and as usual I suggest using cardstock from old packaging for this, since it's quite thick but very easy to cut, and virtually free, which never hurts, does it? We're gonna glue all the pieces in groups of 3 or 4 layers each, like this. We should end up with about a dozen elements, which we'll have to glue to this part, making sure that they're as evenly spaced as possible. Next, we're gonna cut this part, and for this one I switched to a lightweight type of cardstock since it's softer and easier to shape. To make it even more malleable, we'll press it against a wet sponge this way, and then we'll carefully glue it around the base we've just assembled. We should end up with this. Next, we're gonna cut this part 3 or 4 times, and once again we'll stack the layers together. The final piece should be roughly 2 mm in thickness. We're gonna repeat the same process for all these parts, and in the end we should have these 4 elements. We'll glue them together, going from the biggest to the smallest, and aligning them at the bottom. Next, we'll cut this part twice, and we'll glue the 2 sides together. The resulting piece should be approximately 1 mm thick. We'll repeat this step for all these parts, and we should end up with all these pieces. Once again, we'll have to combine them, going from the biggest to the smallest. At this point, we can join these 2 parts, and then we'll glue the assembled piece to the one we made earlier. Next, we'll cut this little circle twice, and we'll glue 2 layers together. And just a little tip, if you're using my free printable template, using a circle cutter, a paper punch, or a hole punch will make this project much easier. Alternatively, if you have a cutting machine like a Cricut, a Silhouette, or a Nextool M1 Ultra, you can use my digital templates, which you can find in my shop, linked in the description. We're gonna repeat this step for all these parts, and just like before, we'll stack all the resulting elements from biggest to smallest, but this time aligning them all at the center. Next, we'll cut all these tiny circles once each, and we'll assemble them like this. We'll have to combine these 2 parts together. Then we'll cut this, we'll stack all the sides, and we'll glue the resulting piece to the one we've just assembled this way. Lastly, we'll attach this element to the rest of the mixer structure. Next, we'll have to cut this strip into copy paper, and we'll glue it around a toothpick this way. We'll tap the resulting little cylinder with this part. And lastly, we'll glue the finished piece to the front of our little stand mixer. After that, we'll have to cut this little circle 3 or 4 times, and once again we'll stack all the layers. All the layers together. Then we'll cut these 2 parts twice each, and we'll glue the 4 layers to the first ring this way. Lastly, we're gonna cut this part 3 or 4 times, and we'll glue all the layers to the others like this. We'll attach the final piece to the rest of the structure. Then I glued a small magnet into this hole, which is optional, but it'll make swapping detachments easier later on. I always recommend these magnets since they're super useful for miniatures, and I'll have them linked in the description along with all the other supplies I used for this project, just in case. But if you can't get them, booster putty or double-sided tape will work too. Next, we'll have to cut this part quite a few times, and if you're using my free printable template, I suggest piercing this little hole with an awl or a needle. Once again, we'll have to glue all the layers together until we get to a final piece that's around 7 mm in thickness. Next, we're gonna cut this part a handful of times, and we'll glue all the layers in 2 groups, both roughly 2 mm thick. We'll stick the resulting pieces to the left and right sides of the part we assembled earlier, and finally we'll attach it to the rest of the stand mixer structure. Now it's time to start working on the base. First, we'll have to cut this part quite a lot of times, and as always we'll glue all the layers together until we get to a thickness of around 7 mm. Basically, this part should be just as thick as this one. Next, we'll cut this part a few times, and we'll glue layers in 2 groups, each around 2 mm in thickness. We'll attach these two pieces to the one we assembled earlier, one on each side. Then we'll cut this little rectangle into lightweight cardstock and we'll glue it to the front of the mixer's base this way. We'll do the same thing with this part, but this time we'll glue it to the back. Next, we'll have to cut this part 3 or 4 times, and as always, we'll stack all the layers together. We're gonna repeat the exact same process for this part. And we should end up with these two elements that we'll have to glue together like this. Finally, we can combine these two parts to make the base of our miniature stand mixer. Now that the base structure is ready, it's time to refine it. We'll start by covering the entire surface of the mixer with a generous coat of acrylic gesso. This will make it look more even, both in color and texture. Then, and this is sort of optional, but we can spread a bit of spackle over all the parts with visible layers. This will help making the stand mixer look smoother and overall more realistic. Next, we can paint the entire surface of the mixer with acrylic paints. And finally, we'll coat our miniature stand mixer with a layer of gloss varnish. You can also use clear nail polish if you prefer. Now this next part was really fun to figure out because the KitchenAid has this metallic section with printed details and an engraved logo, so I wanted to use metallic cardstock for that chrome look. And by the way, you can find it on Amazon, but also it often comes with food packaging if you're looking for a cheaper alternative. The thing is, metallic cardstock is a little glossy, which makes it kinda tricky to use ink on it. So instead of printing the design, I use the foil transfer tip on my M1 Ultra, which is basically a scoring tool to emboss it. And then I filled in the printed details with a black marker. Now if you don't have a cutting machine, technically you could emboss the design by hand, but it's very laborious, so I've included a printable label in my template to make it easier. We're gonna glue this part to this one, which we'll cut into copy paper and paint black. Then we'll stick the resulting piece to the top of the mixer. We'll repeat a similar process for this part, which we'll have to glue here. And then we'll have to cut this teeny tiny strip once again into metallic cardstock and we'll glue it around this little disc this way. Next, we'll need 3 small beads. We'll paint them with black nail polish and then we'll glue them to the left, right, and front sides of the mixer like this. Finally, we'll cut and emboss the circle and we'll attach it to the mixer's base. At this point, we can connect the top and bottom parts of the mixer using a needle, an eye pin, or even just a small piece of metal wire. And since I was using a flat head eye pin, I used 2 instead of 1 so that the flat ends would be visible on both sides of the mixer. It's time to start working on the accessories. First, we'll have to grab another eye pin or metal wire, although I do recommend using a flat head pin as the flat end will provide more grip for the magnet. We'll cut the pin at a length of just a little over a centimeter. Then we'll cut this strip into copy paper and we'll glue it around one end of the eye pin like this. We'll repeat the process to make a second identical piece. Then we'll cut this part 3 or 4 times. We'll stack the layers together to get to a piece that's around 1 millimeter in thickness. And we'll attach it to the eye pin this way. To make the second attachment, we'll have to cut this part 3 or 4 times, and once again we'll stack all the layers together. We'll repeat the same step for this part. Then we'll have to cut this teeny tiny circle a few times, and we'll glue all the pieces together. At this point, we can attach these 3 elements like this, and lastly we'll glue the finished piece to the second eye pin. Now, to make a bowl, we can go 2 different ways. The easiest option is to use something like an old cap or a coffee pot and paint it silver. The second option is using paper. So we'll cut this part into metallic cardstock, we'll spray it with water until it's very wet, and then we'll roll it against something round like a big paintbrush to give it a rounded shape. We'll attach the 2 ends using this part cut into copy paper. Then we'll cut this little circle twice. We'll glue the two sides together, and then we'll attach the resulting disc to the bottom of the previous piece. Next, we're gonna cut this part. Once again, we'll have to spray it with water. And finally, we'll glue it around the other one. Honestly, I'm not sure which version of the bowl I like better, because this one has the right metallic finish, but this one has a better shape, so I don't know, what do you think? Anyway, as promised, here's a link to the free printable template, and if you're in a miniature cooking mood, you may want to watch this video next to learn how to make a set of miniature Le Creuset-inspired pots. And this is all for today, until next time, bye!